Today we are looking at Fluffals, a possible sleeper deck that does not see much play anymore, at least from what I have experienced. While Master Rule 4 has certainly hurt the playability and explosiveness of Fluffals, anyone who says otherwise is completely wrong. One of the biggest problems with Fluffals, in my opinion, is a sense of exhaustion with existing popular strategy. Basically, deck design has become stale in a sense, which may have limited versatility and viability of deck. For the most popular builds are certainly not winning anything, but it can be argued that the most popular builds are not the best builds either. It's just fallen into this almost first impression groupthink understanding that, oh, this must be the best build, so why bother even trying any other build? So, what are some strategies that are not popularly utilized in most Fluffal builds that could take them to the next level in an MR4 world of Yu-Gi-Oh? Well, let's see if we can find some in my most recent Fluffal build. Not surprisingly, I run 3 copies of Dog for searching, 3 copies of Penguin for draw speed, due to the need to get to the fusion triggering cards and having the ability to dump toy vendors from hand. I'm of the opinion that running 3 copies of Penguin is basically mandatory because there's really just nothing bad about Penguin. 3 copies of Bear for toy vendor searching, polymerization recycling on the rare occasions it's valuable, Wings combination efficiency, and worst case scenario, it's just fusion material. 1 copy of Owl for polymerization searching, as multiple copies, in my opinion, can be rather bricky due to the number of actual fusion cards that you use in the deck. So, Owl's overall effect becomes somewhat less useful. 1 copy of Cat and 1 copy of Rabbit for fusion piece recycling and fusion effect negation interruption. Closing out the Fluffal monsters, I run the Goldilocks number of wings in 2 copies to increase the percentage of hitting the wings combo, for as any Fluffal player knows, hitting that draw significantly increases the probability of victory. However, I feel that 3 copies are too much due to the hard once per turn condition on the combination, and that third wings deck spot is much more useful elsewhere thanks to all the searching this deck has. For the Imp monsters, I run 2 Edge Imp Sabres and, I guess, pseudo Edge Imp Sabres in 2 copies of King of the Swamp to act as Edge Imp Sabre stand-ins as well as search polymerization. Now, some may really question my deck building skills due to the lack of any Edge Imp chains. My position on chain has always been the same from the start. For those who run 2 or 3 copies, tell me why. In the past, I used to run 1 copy, but with the expansion of the importance of summoning Tiger to the field in a Link Summons world to nuke boards, something that Chain cannot participate in, the value of Chain is almost non existent for me, even with Knightmares and their potential to somewhat shrug off Tiger's effect. Chain's on-field effect, Chain Search, is rather worthless. Chain's fusion material participation is not valuable, as I previously alluded to, only being required for Sheep, which can be dealt with via instant fusion for those times you actually need to bring Sheep to the field. He could summon Kraken, but so could any other Edge Imp monster. So the only real benefit of Chain is that Frightfur card search. However, what Frightfur card does one really want? Frightfur Fusion used to be valuable, but Master Rule 4 really hit its viability due to the increased speed of the game and the need to Sabre-tooth climb, which Frightfur Fusion cannot do very well because of the banishment of materials, including the climbing Frightfur Fusion monster that more than likely Sabre-tooth would have summoned from the graveyard. Basically, Frightfur Fusion most of the time has to go backwards due to the single extra deck spot. Fusion summon first with Frightfur Fusion, then the next fusion trigger, like Polymerization, which then goes second. However, because Frightfur Fusion has to go first, the search from Chain becomes less efficient, because Usually, you're getting that search when chain is used for polymerization to summon that first crack. In short, Frightfur Fusion under Master Rule 4 has become a grind card. You use it on turn 3 or higher versus an OTK card, and Fluffals are not a good grind deck. Thus, this strips a significant amount of the value from Frightfur Fusion. Some may argue, what about Link monsters, which would save the viability and versatility of Frightfur Fusion? While true, in my opinion, Fluffals can make Link monsters, their summons typically involves board stabilization rather than going for victory. Victory with Fluffals under MR4 largely entails Sabre-tooth climbing, not summoning multiple Frightfurs without Sabre-tooth supported by a Link monster. The reason for this is because summoning the Link monster commonly costs too much from a resource standpoint. When you had Tofu, this was still kind of a thing you could work with. Oh, I put Tofu on the field, there's my Link monster. High five. Now, resource consumption is much higher because Fluffals don't have a lot of time to wait around for a card like Scapegoat. And running a lot of kind of weird multi-card Link summoning engine is not healthy for the deck either. Overall, can Link summoning really be done in Fluffals? Sure. Should it be relied upon? Not a chance. And I think that's where the lack of efficiency seriously hurts Frightfur Fusion viability. So what about Frightfur Factory? Factory is not a bad card. A spell-based Fluffal Cat, more or less. But is it really useful at one copy when only running one copy of Chain? For one copy of Factory is just not efficient in my eyes. Also, another problem with Factory is that Fluffals commonly do not run any back row, so when Factory is activated, if the opponent has any removal available to them, they bye-bye to Factory because that removal goes from being just a dead card in hand or on the field to something that can actually hurt your playmaking. Right now, I view Frightfur Reborn as the best of the 3 Frightfur spell cards worth running. There are more, but they're not worth running. Really is only a one of. Now, when Frightfur Patchwork is released, running 3 copies of Chain will become much more viable because Patchwork is definitely something you want to search for. But now, there is just no meaningful benefit to running any imp chains that aren't exceeded by better deck choices. I think this locked in mindset with running chain is one of the reasons that Fluffal deck building has become somewhat stagnant and perhaps less successful in the. Finishing up the monsters, I run 1 copy of Eater of Millions, which can be a great threat monster in this deck due to its non-targeting, banish, removing meaningful threats that can board break, because sometimes you may not be able to win the game in a given turn, but using Eater, you can wrest control of the board during your battle phase and make your Tiger and other removal plays during your main phase too, controlling the board and setting yourself up for victory next turn. Worst case scenario, Eater can be a useful Link summons or bait, in a sense, opponent removal or interruption because it is a legitimate threat. The summons is not a big deal because 5 monsters from the extra deck is no problem for players who know what they're doing with the deck because they can feel what monsters will be useful and what monsters will not be useful based on the existing field and the cards in their hand. Finally, I run 1 almost out of left field pet card in Phantom Skyblaster to help Link summoning in order to help facilitate that OTK a little bit better, or heck, just even stalling out for that single turn I might need to stall out because I didn't draw ideally due to the token generation. In some sense, Skyblaster in this deck is a not as great but faster version of Scapegoat, which works better in a deck like Fluffals versus Scapegoat in a deck like Trickstar. Obviously, Phantom Skyblaster has a small drawback in the fact that it has to be normal summoned to get its token effect, but there are enough ways to get a special summoned monster on the field in this deck that 1 copy seems to help more than hinder, but I can see where some other players might be a little wary of it. Before we move on, it must be noted, I don't like either of the Pendulum monsters for this deck. because it just takes away from deck space for actual Fluffal material. Their effects are either a joke or they're kind of more grindy, win more, and don't really help you break the opponent's board or establish your own initial board. Now, for the spells, I run only 2 copies of Polymerization. Whoa, whoa, whoa. Before any viewers throw anything, I also run 3 copies of Dark Fusion. Another big problem for Fluffals is the expansion of quick play, banish, bounce, or spin cards, especially monsters like Firewall Dragon and the rare times you actually see him, ABC Buster Dragon, which hurt combo plays in this deck significantly associated with Sabre-tooth climbing. Summon Kraken, Tiger, or Sheep, and oh, it just got bounced by Firewall Dragon, and Sabre-tooth becomes much less valuable. Firewall and its ilk also buries Sabre-tooth itself as well. I summon Sabre-tooth, activate Sabre-tooth's effect. You don't have a negate. Oh, but you just bounced my Sabre-tooth. Well, that plays kind of a wash. Also, avoiding effect negation is super important because with the boards that some meta decks can make, summoning Tiger and getting its effect off clean is especially important. And the Penguin Cat Rabbit Brigade cannot protect from these various forms of interruption that just don't flat out negate, but that they target the fusion monster and negate it from there. Therefore, you need to back up your Fluffals from these obstructions. While Dark Fusion is not searchable outside of more risky Predaplant hybrids, I think it's mandatory in all Fluffal builds. Also, I like running 1 copy of Raigeki for field clearance, as well as 2 copies of Instant Fusion for summoning Sheep or another fusion monster for link plays or board disruption. While others may disagree, I run 1 copy of Upstart for more speed and consistency. Yes, the extra 1,000 life points for the opponent can get in the way of Kraken and Sabre-tooth OTKing, but in my experience, I find this OTK opportunity is not as available nearly as often as some seem to think or lead others to believe in their own deck analysis. So the consistency increase via Upstart is more beneficial in my eyes. 3 copies of Foolish Burial Goods is somewhat standard for the deck, for despite the hard once per turn and the frequent use of Toy Vendor in other areas, Goods is basically a rota for Fluffals in dumping a Toy Vendor to the graveyard. Foolish Burial is another common card in Fluffal decks that can be useful for dumping an Imp Sabre, and then you can use Imp Sabre's effect to get itself on the field for fusion plays, or Wings for the Wings combo. And I run the 1 allowable copy. I run the 1 obvious Monster Reborn, which helps link summoning, as well as puts more damage on the field to sure up your OTKs. Also, before I forget, because I almost did due to them being so obvious in the deck, of course I run 3 copies of Toy Vendor. So 3 cards left. One can run a set of his or her favorite hand traps. One can run anti-hand traps, called by the grave, or do what I do and run 3 copies of Mind Control. Mind Control is a nice card for this deck, for it helps set up any link plays you might have. It removes meaningful obstacles that prevent OTKing, or worst case scenario, it just forces the opponent to burn a negation. Before moving on to the extra deck, it is certainly time to address the elephant in the room for Fluffals, Brilliant Fusion. Overall, I am anti-Gem Knight Seraphonite in general. I think the card should be banned. But for this deck, on paper, Brilliant Fusion and Seraphonite appear to be fantastic. A free monster for link summoning in Seraphonite, an additional normal summons, although the additional normal summons is really only useful for a dog-owl combination in the same turn, which doesn't come up that often. And you can also dump a Wings off the Brilliant Fusion, set up for your Wings combo more easily. Also, thanks to Edge Imp Sabres' graveyard summoning effect, if you draw Garnet, there are times where you'll have the ability to return that Garnet to the deck to make your Brilliant Fusion live again. However, despite all those advantages, when I tested with Brilliant Fusion, it just didn't work out well for me. I ran into 3 major problems. First, I would open with Garnet without any means to send it back into the deck with Sabres, and Garnet is in this deck pretty much a solid brick. 2. Since Fluffals go second most of the time, the opponent simply had some form of back row removal set up to remove Brilliant Fusion before it could do anything. Because unless they're scared of a Wings combo, they're not going to hit your toy vendor. So it turns that dead back row removal card into a dead Brilliant Fusion for me, and in short, a brick card for me. 3rd, drawn after Fusion Summoning, i.e. draw it off a Penguin's draw effect, there are a fair amount of times when the Brilliant Fusion is dead because you are not able to set up a Link monster and you need to Sabre-tooth climb to win, so you can't summon out Seraphonite. Overall, I just did not get as much value out of Brilliant Fusion as theory suggests I should have in my testing, so I dropped it, opening up 4 deck spots for other cards, the 3 Brilliant Fusions and the 1 Garnet. My experience does not mean that Brilliant Fusion may not work for other players in Fluffals. It just didn't work for me. Overall, I feel Brilliant Fusion is a better go first card than go second card because there are less obstacles to dodge in its removal, and receiving its effect is much more likely. And in doing so, Brilliant Fusion can set up more hardy boards, including a 3-material Sabre-tooth easier, so you can survive your opponent's first turn. For as everyone knows, Fluffals and going first do not mix well. Thus, I feel Brilliant Fusion and its associated engine for this deck side deck choice in those times when, okay, my opponent knows I'm playing Fluffals, I beat them, there's a high probability that my opponent is going to elect for me to go first. For the extra deck, I run 3 Frightfur Sabre-tooths. While you certainly can get by with only 2 copies, there are also times when you just can't get Tiger on the field to blow up the board, and you need to use Brute Force to clear the field, and you need to scale climb with 3 Sabre-tooth to do it. I run only 1 Frightfur Kraken. In my opinion, summoning Kraken really should involve you being set up for an outright win, i.e. the opponent doesn't have any interruption on the field. Otherwise, Kraken will commonly get wrecked before it can do anything, and that second copy becomes somewhat unnecessary, but the deck space in this extra deck is flexible enough that if you're more comfortable running 2 copies of Frightfur Kraken, there's no real problem in doing that. 2 copies of Frightfur Tiger, one of the first and still the best first setups in the fusion chain. 1 Frightfur Sheep. 1 Karbonala Warrior. It's an earth monster that can be summoned via instant fusion. It's nice because it can make rank 4s because it's level 4, but if you find that they're just still too expensive due to the Goki buyout of them, then Fusionist, which is also an earth monster, will be fine, for this is largely just to set up your Mrs. Radiant. 1 Thousand Eyes Restrict. 1 number 41 Bagooska, for there are those times you go first, and it is possible to make this guy if you can't make a 3-material Sabre-tooth. 1 any quality high-level Link monster that you choices are Borreload Dragon, Knightmare Griffin, and Knightmare Unicorn. 1 Decode Talker. 1 Mrs. Radiant. 1 Link Spider for linking with the Skyblaster tokens. And 1 Linkuriboh. Overall, Fluffals can still be a dangerous deck in the existing meta, despite those pesky Knightmare Griffins running around, because people have forgotten Dimensional Barrier is a card. Unfortunately, I find hand traps and Fluffals tend not to get along very well because of simple resource expenditure, and at least in my experience, most high-quality meta builds are not so fragile that a single hand trap stops them in their track. Some still build decks like that, but for the most part, most builds, they're more resilient. Therefore, I think cards like Dark Fusion and Mind Control should start seeing more play in Fluffals for ensuring the effects of your fusion monsters and stealing opponent threats for easier OTKs and helping Link summoning for when Fluffals have to use their own resources to Link summon. It is not efficient because Fluffals really aren't a Link deck. That's why Gofu was so important to them, and Gofu's not around anymore. Overall, I think my biggest problem when I see the standard popular Fluffal build is just a disconnect to what boards that build is commonly facing. The builds are structured like the opponent is doing nothing but dropping one or two monsters with 0 or 1 back row and no interruption or negation. Well, heck, if the opponent does that, then sure, the popular build can crush that board commonly. But when I play Fluffals, I don't see boards where the opponent basically bricks. I see at least 5, 6 cards on the opponent's field with multiple interruptions commonly, and the popular build tends to fall on its face against those builds. Hence my belief that a new way of thinking is needed. Now, I'm not saying this is the best, super awesome, #1 A plus Fluffal deck, view it now, period. But I've had more success with it than the more popular build in the given play environment. Well, that is my Fluffal deck. Thank you for your attention and your time. I'm out.